right. Welcome, everybody. Looks like we're recording. So let's go ahead and do a roll call again.
All right. Nicole Bailey. Do not see her. Andrea Chiribogaflora.
Here.
Thank you. John Conley.
Here.
Thank you. Captain Dittman is not here. Trevor Forbes.
Here.
Thank you. Troy Hill. I do not see him. Jim House.
Here.
Thank you. Nicole Lawless.
Here.
Thank you. Michael Pierce.
Here.
Thank you. Gregory Punsky. His invite indicated he would probably not be here. Brandon Rich. Likewise, his invitation response did not look like he would be here. Jeffrey Reister.
Here.
Thank you. Nathan Riley, that's myself. I am here. And Joyanne Rusha. I do not see her yet. All right, that's everyone. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nate. We're going to punt on approving the minutes from the last meeting to our next meeting on the 26th. So on the 26th, we'll be reviewing and approving the minutes from the last meeting and the minutes from this meeting, just so everyone's aware. All right. I guess first, just administrative thing. I'm kind of thinking through folks that might miss the last and most important meeting in the event no one reaches out to them and reminds them. I have Troy Hill's, get my pen. I have Troy Hill's contact information and business email. So I'll reach out to Troy and remind him of the meeting on the 26th and try to persuade him to join that. Nate, I know we talked earlier before we started recording about the law enforcement Captain Dittman's replacement, that you're in contact with those folks. And so hopefully we'll have someone there. Joyanne, I'm sure will be there. I think maybe she just had a conflict today. Anyone else that I'm missing that maybe we should make sure and reach out to?
Did you say Nicole Bailey?
Oh yeah, Miss Bailey. I don't know if let me see if I have her.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've seen her.
Yeah, let me see if I have her personal email. Bailey. Okay, I do. So I have an email for Miss Bailey, and I'll reach out to her as well, and hopefully we'll get her next meeting. All right. Okay, everybody. I guess as many of you know, we kind of talked through our outline last meeting. So first, let's kind of open up to anyone who has any kind of things they want to discuss regarding that outline or the contents or anything like that. And then after we kind of work through all that or any comments everyone has, and maybe we can pull up the outline and then just kind of walk through. Some of us have been assigned some portions to kind of do a rough draft of. And so we can each kind of go through and say, hey, I kind of started and here's where I'm at, and people can chime in and all that kind of stuff with the intent of prior to the next meeting, all those sections, like the initial draft of those have been emailed to the group, which I think we'll probably have to post later, just for transparency purposes. But before the next meeting, everyone who has one of those sections has provided it to the group. Everyone in the group kind of review that before the next meeting, and we can kind of work through those and kind of get some consensus on each of those sections before we move into the very last section, which is kind of our recommendations, which is probably going to take the longest. And we'll knock that out next meeting and hopefully be done. So, all right, so I'll open it up. Who's got stuff they want to talk about?
Do we want to pull up the outline just so
Sure.
we can all follow along?
Yeah, how about I share my screen? Oh, actually, I have a hard time with the Google Meets or whatever. Nate, do you have it? Maybe you can share your screen. I have technical difficulties on my Mac for some reason.
Let me see if I can do that. Hold on.
And I think I sent the one out that in red had who kind of was assigned sections or something.
Okay, I have a copy here, but I don't think it's the updated copy. So I had like, I think what you had first
Oh, okay.
circulated prior to the last meeting, but I know we made some changes to it. So I don't think I'm not
So
seeing that copy.
I'll send you right now the updated one. Okay, I just sent it to you. Oh, Nate, it looks like we just Miss Rusha just joined us.
Yep, I see. Thanks.
Hey everyone, sorry about that.
No problem.
Difficulty. I'm gonna keep oh, I have my that's my coffee maker. Gonna keep my video off today because I'm getting like feedback and a lag, but I'm here.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Still haven't seen that email yet.
Oh. Showing through.
But yeah, just to kind of give everybody a quick rundown, in case you didn't already know. So we have the first section of the report is going to be the background and authority section, which will explain the history of the task force, the legislative history, and the mandate. So basically our duties and responsibilities as outlined in the statute. Oh, there it is. Okay, let me open this real quick. Okay. All right, here we go. Let me zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay. So, all right, Trevor, did you want to go ahead?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll just kind of talk about each one, see if anyone has any thoughts. The background authority, Mr. Riley's doing this, but it's pretty straightforward. Just talking about the history of the task force, when the original task force was created, what it did, when our task force was created, the makeup of our membership, and our mandate, our legislative mandate, kind of what we're designed to do. And Nate will be drafting up.
Well, yeah, it's already drafted. I already finished that section. I've moved on to section 4. It's taking a little longer than I expected, but yeah, no, I am done with section 1. So basically, it just indicates that the and I'll show it to y'all if you want, but it's like a page and a half almost. And it basically indicates that in 2014, that's when the Colorado legislature created the task force. It was through House Bill 14-1031. And the statutory authority that created it was under 40-10.1403. It outlines how the task force was initially constituted. So it outlines the 9 members, because back then it was 9 members when it was first formed. So it outlines who those members were, so like who they represented and all of that. Then I move on to 2021, House Bill 21-1283, including the most notable change, which was increasing the membership from 9 to 14 members. And then I went ahead and did an outline of who those members are as well. I assume we're going to want to put I had a little note here. I'm assuming we're going to want to put the current roster of who's filling all the respective spots somewhere in this report. I just wasn't sure where that was best to go.
I think in that section would make sense. It seems like.
In this section?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Hey, I'm happy to put it in there. I wasn't sure if maybe it was more appropriate as like maybe a header to the report or something, that kind of thing.
I'm kind of agnostic. I'd say put it in that section unless someone has a strong opinion or something. Otherwise, doesn't sound like it. So, all right, good. Yeah, I don't think we need to review that mostly, Nate, because I can't imagine that anyone would have any
Okay.
issue.
The only other parts I had is I outline our statutory mandate under 4010.14035. So I specifically outline what the statute says we're supposed to do. And I went ahead and added on the thing they just added in House Bill 2213-14, where it wants us to do that analysis of the relationship between consensual and non-consensual tow rates. So that's in there as well. And then I indicate the statutory deadline for this report, which is November 1st per 4010.14035A. And then the last paragraph, I just do kind of a quick summary of the last real activity that the task force did prior to us all becoming involved, or at least those of us who hadn't been on before. So I listed, and tell me, maybe John has some thoughts on this. The last thing I could really find that the towing task force had submitted to the PUC was that big report that had been submitted under 16R0095TO, which was submitted back in March of 2016. I know that the task force probably did some work after that. I'm not sure if anything else was submitted. Do you remember, John?
If anything else was submitted after that?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
that was the last thing submitted.
Okay, and that's what I saw too in PUC records. So I wasn't sure if maybe something got submitted, but it didn't get filed in a proceeding or something. So that's what I just wanted to make sure. But I kind of outlined some of the primary recommendations that were included in that particular submission back in that rulemaking, and that's it. That's that section. That's pretty much all the information.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Nate. I guess before I move on, any thoughts or comments on that section before we move to the next? All right. The second is the history of non-consensual tow rates. So I'm putting together something on this, and I determined that I wasn't going to come up with anything more robust or more accurate than the history of towing rates primer that Nate has linked. If you look on the Towing Task Force website, I think it's the February meeting. If you click on that, it'll pull up like a Google Docs thing, and you can download that primer. I mean, it's like, I don't know, 30 pages or something. It's quite robust. And it's very detailed, chronological. I don't think that I'm going to come up with anything better. So on that section, and I'll send this out before our next meeting so everyone can review, I have one kind of short paragraph that basically just says, actually, I'll just sort of paraphrase it, that the PUC has been regulating tow carriers and non-consensual tow rates for over 30 years. We're not actually sure when that started, but we know it was at least before 1994. And that during that time, there's been numerous rulemakings involving economists, PUC expert staff, the industry, et cetera, that have gone through various iterations, and that all those findings and proceedings can be found in the primer, which is Exhibit A. And so I've listed Exhibit A, and then we'll attach that to the back of the report so someone can read all those detailed proceeding summaries after that. And then if someone really wanted to dig in, each one of those proceedings has a proceeding number, and someone could go to the PUC website and pull up all those. But it would be, I mean, literally thousands of documents or thousands of pages. So I don't think we should include that in the report. And then the only other less broad thing I plan on putting in there is just to annotate that from 2019 to 2021, there were two proceedings that collectively resulted in a CPI adjustment annually being applied to non-consensual tow rates. And then I just leave it at that. And then they can reference the report. So that's all I'm planning on putting in that. But I would love to hear if anyone has any thoughts or additions or anything like that on that section. Awesome.
Real quick,
yeah.
you have a draft that you can circulate now, or I'm just curious where you are and
I do, yeah. I have a draft of that paragraph, and I'll submit it. You just do some work, but after this meeting, I'll take 30 minutes and just clean it up and make sure I didn't do any spelling errors, and I'll email that to the group and everyone can take a look at it.
Okay. I'm just wondering when the work is going to go on, if we read that and see need for edits.
Yeah, I think we'll have to do, it's not perfect, but basically, we'll circulate these sections that people are doing. And then on the 26th, we'll kind of pull them up, everyone kind of look at them, and mostly I'd like to constrain any, on like Nate's section, for example. If anyone has any like significant material issues with it, then we can bring that up and make some changes. But mostly, these sections should not be, they're just factual, so they shouldn't be contentious. And so mostly like, what Nate writes, as long as he's not lying about a bunch of stuff or anything crazy, then I think we should just kind of say, okay, hey, yeah, we're all good with it and move on. Although obviously there may be some grammar that people would prefer or whatever, but I think given our tight timeline, we need to stick to the stuff that is going to be really important, I think. That's generally what I think. So I suspect that meeting on the 26th could go over 2 hours in the event that people have lots of opinions and thoughts on these kind of factual, more direct sections. Ms. Rusha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had two things. One, I don't know if it's you or Nate that has the draft outline, but is it possible to drop like a Google Doc link in this chat so we can see what you see and maybe blow it up or scroll back and forth?
Yeah.
I am working on that right now.
Okay, thank you. I'm
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm on my smaller laptop, so it's tiny. I'm gonna make sure I can follow along. And then since we have Mr. Roberts here, I had a question. When we're going through this document, when we're working on this collaboratively, can we email the entire task force our sections, or do we have to do it in a public forum, or do we have to do everything in a Google Doc? And that also includes any comments we might have in the interim between our meetings. I know we've gone over this, but if you could give like a 2-minute refresh on best practices in trying not to violate the law and have 12 people write one document.
I appreciate that. The rule is that you can't talk about task force business outside of a task force meeting. That's the overarching rule about communication. We talked last time about there being one person to receive the sections. Nate or Trevor, do you guys remember what we talked about last time?
Yeah, I think the idea was Nate would receive the sections from folks and kind of hold them and keep them, and then we could review on the 26th. I think the fundamental question, this may be what Joanne was getting at, is that can the whole group, like my section, like section 2, can I send that to the whole group for everyone to take a look at to be prepared for the meeting? Because that would obviously be more efficient and useful. But obviously maybe that's against the rules and we can only send it to Nate and we can only discuss those sections during the actual meeting.
Yeah, unfortunately that's how it needs to happen, is that it needs to go to Nate, and then Nate will compile them, and then we'll talk about them in the open forum of the task force meeting. Joanne, the issue is that the statute, the open meetings law statute, defines a meeting as any kind of correspondence between, or a communication between two members of a public agency, and that includes electronic communications like Messenger or FaceTime or any of these other newfangled platforms that the kids these days are using to communicate. But it also includes email. So we can't email each other about our sections or even share the sections. They just need to go through Nate, and then we'll talk about them as a group.
So, and I am sorry to just keep beating this one. So if we email things to Nate, can Nate distribute it to the group, or because Nate is staff, or does it not work because Nate's also part of the task force? And or could we put everything in a Google Doc so that makes it more of a public document?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What we could do is, depending on when Nate collects all the pieces, he could put it out with the agenda. So I represent other programs within DORA, and their agendas have many items. I mean, like one of my clients has a 2,400 page agenda for their upcoming meeting on Friday. So it's the agenda that we received today, and then anything after that would be agenda items. So Nate could put them all together, and then it could go out with the meeting agenda.
Oh, okay. Well, that might be the path that I think.
Could I make a suggestion too? This is bridging off of the possibility of using Google Docs. Since Google Docs are publicly available, and they have there's both a suggested edits function and a comments function within Google Docs. I'm wondering if given that it's public, if we could do something like, say, announce that there is an ongoing discussion of the contents of the report within the Google Docs document, and whether that would count as sufficient public notice for us to be able to just work on the Google Doc as time permits, and do stuff before the meeting rather than hold all of the discussion to that one tight 2-hour time frame.
I think that's a great outside the.
We lost Mr. Roberts.
So I get to say no all the time. So I think that using the Google Docs and saying there's something ongoing, I don't think that's sufficient. But on a tangent of that, if a couple of you wish to work on a section together, you could set a date and time where you'll get together and work on the same Google Doc, and then we could notice that particular date and time. So you have to be date and time specific so that we can notify the public.
I kind of, in the interest of all of our short time and only one meeting left, maybe I'll make an executive decision unless someone really has problems with it, to just say, here's what we'll do. Anyone who's writing a section needs to submit it to Nate directly prior to, or no later than close of business on the 24th, which is 2 days prior to our meeting on the 26th. Nate can send those out with the agenda. And I think that's just the easiest way to do this. And that way everyone gets to see those for 2 days prior. I understand that doesn't allow 6 or 7 people to make comments and changes on grammar and all that kind of stuff. But I just don't think that in the interest of time, we have time to kind of get that nitpicky on these sections, because I think that we're going to need to spend a lot of time on our conclusion recommendations. So that is going to be the meat of this report. And I don't know that there's a lot of value in us having multiple people work on a section that just talks about the history or something like this, because those are just kind of factual things. So unless someone has a significant issue, I'd prefer to let's have everyone send it to Nate by close of business on the 24th. Nate will distribute with the agenda. And if anyone has any significant issues on those sections, they can bring them up on the 26th during our meeting. Mr. Riley.
Yeah, that seems like a good plan. And I know that we had kind of spoken about that last week during our meeting. I'm perfectly comfortable receiving all the different portions of the report and putting them all together and kind of giving it as clean a sweep as possible, just to make it as, consistency in language and, that kind of thing, just to make it a little more of a technical report, at least as much as possible. I would probably ask for a little bit more time than getting it by the 24th. I'd actually say the 21st, if that's possible. That's next Friday.
Well, yeah, I think that's fine, but I don't think you need to take those and then compile them and turn them into report.
Oh, okay.
I think literally Trevor sends section 2, here's my verbiage, and you literally just take what I sent you, and that's an attachment to the agenda.
Oh, okay. That's fine too.
Yeah, and then everyone just sees the raw submission from each person who had a section, and then on the 26th, you or me or somebody will pull up a Word document, share the screen, and we'll just start taking those things and copy and pasting and making sections and just moving through it, I think.
I'd like to suggest a slightly different time frame. So working with what Nate had suggested, I think it would be good to have the drafts compiled or submitted by the 21st, and then Nate can compile them, and then if they're available by the 21st and then perhaps distributed by the 22nd, that would give us at least time to review it. And if we have issues, to be able to submit those issues as potential agenda items that we could then talk about on the 26th. And that way we've signaled them before the actual meeting occurs. And then the meeting on the 26th can be, I think, focused more on sorting through those issues and focusing on the most important issues that were raised in the request, say, for agenda topics on the 26th. So that way, the goal of that version of it is so that we're not cluttered with a whole lot of thoughts that people have on the 26th and not enough time to get through them or sort through what they are and prioritize. I think we might spend too much time doing the sorting and the prioritizing on the 26th if we can't do it. Submit our comments beforehand.
Well, so that's the thing, Michael. I don't think we can, right? Like we can't, like, for him to send it out and then us send back to the group or whatever, like our thoughts on people's sections. Like, we can't do that because it's not an official meeting. So I agree with you. That makes way more sense. But my understanding, Mr. Roberts can tell me if I'm wrong, like that just can't happen. We're going to have.
No. Well, so the version of what I'm saying is sending our thoughts are basically agenda item requests. And I believe that falls short of discussion. So Mr. Roberts, I'm curious if you can weigh in on that.
I'd be happy to, Michael. Agenda item request. What I'm trying to visualize how that would look. What do you have in mind?
Well, so we've got a draft, right? And that's circulated. Right. That's part of the agenda. And then if we receive that on the 22nd, say, and then the goal would then be to submit requests that we look at such and such portion of this draft on the 26th, right? So that's the form of the comments on that draft, and then on the 26th we sort through which of those would be the priority for the group to work through, and which we would have to set aside.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. I think that might be a little complicated with the time frame that we're dealing with. I think if we have it on 22nd-ish, that gives the group 4 days to like drop in red lines or make comments on it. So we can, and Trevor, this is kind of what I have in mind. We'll have the document up or we work from our own. Anybody have any comments on?
Did we lose Mr. Roberts?
I think so. I think we did. Let's see. I'm gonna send a little chat thing and ask him maybe if he turns off his video, it'll. Mr. Roberts.
Can you hear me okay?
Okay, we can hear you now. Maybe if you like try turn off, there you go. Try turn off your video.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys can look at Dave Mason instead of my face. The idea I had is if we have the document up at the meeting on the 26th, Trevor, you can just kind of go through section by section because everyone's not going to have comments on every section. So I don't think it's going to take that long to get through everybody's red lines or comments at that meeting, but I could be mistaken.
If we did this, would this suffice, Michael, if we said, okay, that by the 21st, anyone who has section submits that to Nate. Nate on, end of the day, 21st or on the 22nd or something. He sends out the agenda, and each of those sections that people have submitted are one of the attachments to the agenda. And then between that and the 26th, if people have something they really want to put as an agenda item, they can email Nate and request him to add a discussion topic to the agenda.
That works.
Like, would that suffice? But I'll tell everyone, like, if you have something you want to talk about during that meeting, we'll talk about it. It doesn't necessarily, just because something's not on the agenda item doesn't mean you can't discuss, because effectively we're going to go through every section. So there is no section that's not going to be discussed. But Michael, would that be okay with you if we did that?
Yeah, I think so. Well, part of my goal is to get to organize the 26th so that so that if we have more requests for discussion of sections than we can get through, we can at least do a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess the way I saw it is that, you know, again, as long as everybody has the different assigned sections to me, you know, and again, as close to a final version as possible, I can go ahead and circulate those, and then in the in-between time between when those come to me and and when I circulate them, people can take that time between then and the actual meeting itself on the 26th to review it and make little comments as you're reviewing the different sections, so that as we're going through it in the meeting on the 26th, when we get to that certain part where one of your notes comes into play, you just raise your hand and we have that discussion. And then
Yep,
if we need to change it, we'll just do it right there in real time. Or if we need to add something or update certain language, or, you know, whatever we feel we need to do. And then, you know, slowly but surely we'll make it all the way through that report. And then we can have our larger discussion at the end when we get to the section where we're talking about our conclusions and our recommendations. And I'm hoping we can get there pretty soon in that meeting, so that we can spend most of our time really getting that to the best place possible. Because again, with the goal being by the end of that meeting, and I agree with Trevor, I think it'll go longer than 2 hours on that particular day. By the end of the meeting, we hold the vote that this is the report we're submitting, and then that's what we submit. So that kind of is how I saw this all going.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're good. If you got a section, submit it to Nate by the 21st. Everyone good? Great. Oh, Mr. Connolly.
I would love if Nate would fix that wording.
For your section?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I did already receive the submission from John. It was the whole versus non-consensual portion of the report. If you want, I can go ahead and slice it into my section, because I was going to do the other parts under section 4, and I can just put it at the end, if that's okay.
Yeah, and then if you could, you know, make it flow with proper language. You're better at that than I am.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Let's try to move on. See here. Okay, section 3, we originally thought maybe Miss Bailey did it, but I'm thinking maybe now that's not ideal. Number 3 is pretty straightforward and easy. I'm happy to do it unless somebody wants to do it. It's basically just saying, like, here's the meetings we've had. This was our first meeting. This is the last one. This is generally what we've discussed, and that's kind of it. But I'm happy to do it unless somebody else would like to.
Yeah, I think it should. I agree with you. It should be pretty. Where's that echo coming from? I think it's coming from you, Trevor. Yeah, no, I agree that section should be pretty easy to put together just by looking at the minutes. I'm pretty sure our minutes are up to date. Every single agenda meetings / meetings section on the Towing Task Force website, each date of an actual full meeting, not the work groups, those didn't have minutes. But the actual meetings, those minutes should be all in there and accessible to everybody. So I would assume it would be pretty easy to put that together for whomever wants to do it.
Right. I'll do it, but I'd love a volunteer. Anyone want one? Anyone bored? No. All right. I'll knock that one out. That shouldn't take long. All right, next up is a review of key findings. So the first one, responses, but it's kind of demographics, for lack of a better term. Nate's going to do this. And Nate, why don't you kind of talk about generally what that subsection will kind of entail?
Sure. So I have already started that section. Let me pull up my notes here. Okay, so basically what I indicated is that as part of our review and discussion regarding recommendations for the maximum rates for non-consensual tows, that we created our survey to kind of collect, and the purpose of that survey was to obtain information that would assist us, the task force members, in reaching more effective conclusions regarding essentially what it takes to operate a towing carrier in Colorado. I basically said as the questions as outlined below range from demographic data to financial information. Survey participants were made aware of how the responses were to be used by the task force, and all applicable information was voluntarily disclosed. Yeah, I outlined kind of how the PUC essentially did this on behalf of the task force. Like, we were the one who did all the logistical steps associated with the survey. Towing Task Force created the survey. We kind of acted as the arm that got it accomplished. It went out on the 17th of August with a deadline of August 31st. I indicated the number of responses we received, and that all the responses came from currently licensed towing carriers. And then this part, I wasn't really sure where to go from there. And so what I ended up doing, and this is the part that's taking a little longer than I expected, which is I basically am going through all the different questions. So I'm basically putting an outline of what the question was, what the basis for that question was, a summary of the response data, and then discussion about kind of what the data means, more or less. And so basically, that's how I'm outlining it. I'm into the questions. Again, it's taken, some of them are taking a little longer than I anticipated to actually go through and summarize that data is taking a little longer than I expected. And of course, we'll attach the data to this report. I'm assuming that's something we'll be doing. So that'll be accessible. But again, I think this report is intended to not have people diving into a bunch of attachments. It's supposed to summarize it. So I do think we have to have that there. Basically, at the end, after I've gone through all the different, there's 9 total questions. I'm about a third through those questions. So I'll keep working on that. By the time I get to the end, I'll indicate, I think how I'm doing it should be able to cover subsection A of section 4. So where it says responses by demographics, truck count, locations, et cetera, that should be incorporated to how I'm doing this. And then after I'm done going through all the questions, also the changes in inspections carriers. So C, changes in expenses carriers have reported versus actual inflation. I can put in a portion about that when I get to those questions. And then the survey shortfalls, I figured I could do at the end after I go through all the questions. And again, I remember what everybody's concerns were, and I can refer to our minutes from back on the 14th of September. I know there was quite a bit in the minutes about some concerns we had about the data. And then finally, like I said, the portion that John had circulated regarding the consensual versus non-consensual tows, I think I can go ahead and splice that in at the end of that, and that should probably handle most of that section.
Awesome, thanks. And on that note, on that last section, Mr. Connolly, could you just kind of give us a brief synopsis of what you're kind of producing for that section? In other words, like, what are the major differences between consensual versus non-consensual and all that? So kind of everyone knows what to expect. John heard me or not, or he might be on mute. Awesome. There you go.
Sorry. Try that again.
Could you, on that section D that you're producing, the kind of the comparison between what a consensual and non-consensual rates and cost structures look like, could you tell us generally what you think will be in that section?
I pretty much just basically lined out what consent towing was, where prices are negotiated between towers and consumers, and then where non-consent is price is not, sorry, I'm fighting a cold, so bear with me. Pretty much just the differences between the two, and then hitting on the things that are required by a non-consent tower that are not required by a consent tower. Facilities, equipment, 24 hours a day. Just the differences pretty much between the two. I don't know. I did probably a page and a half, 2 page maybe on that.
I think it was longer than that. I thought it was like 3 or 4 pages.
It might have been.
Sorry, hold on. Let me look it up real quick. It's hold on.
Yeah, 2 pages.
Yeah, a little over 2 pages. Did you include anything about like what the definition of a consensual versus a non-consensual tow is? I know that's something else we thought about adding.
Kinda. I didn't really put the definition. I just kind of laid out what a consent tow was versus what a non-consent tow was.
Okay.
just, basically that, a consent tow is something that's negotiated between the consumer and the tower. That trying to explain the different markets in towing, to try to show that where the average person sees a tow, and you see a tow on a tow truck and you think it's a basic tow. So you're looking at the same style of tow, but the costs are more money in one aspect than the other. And why is it that someone who's doing non-consent and consent towing charges different rates between the two? And just kind of going into that, kind of showing where the guaranteed payment on a consent versus the non-consent, the cost that you have as a non-consent tower versus a consent tower, kind of just hitting on all of those. The percentages, I wanted to take the data that we got and kind of look at the data between the consent rates and the non-consent rates and kind of add that in there. I just kind of threw in the numbers of my own business, but we could probably tidy that up to more details from the numbers we got.
Awesome. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
All right. So next section, review impacts of 2022 legislation, towing industry revenue and financial performance. And actually, in parentheses, I have Connolly help, but then I realized Mr. Connolly can't help because of the reasons we described earlier. So I'll do that section, and then Mr. Connolly may, and other people might, but given we experienced this, Mr. Connolly on the 26th may have some other things to add that he thought of that I didn't. But effectively, it's pretty narrow. I'm only talking about direct revenue impacts, and that would specifically be storage revenue, because the timeline, there's a proration now on daily storage revenues that changes in the downward direction revenue for tow carriers on tow, in addition to reduction on notification fees. And so I'll kind of highlight those, and maybe some people have some more things to add or subtract, but I'll keep that one pretty straightforward. That one probably won't be more than half a page. It'll be pretty short. All right. Next is, conclusion and recommendations. And this is maybe where we can kind of start talking about, the other thing is, I just remembered something on the impacts, on certain types of non-consensual tows on private property. Some portion of people don't have to actually pay anymore. And so the effective revenue a towers receive is reduced because people don't pay for the services. They get them for free now. So that'll be in there as well. I kind of want to now move on to conclusion recommendations and just kind of open it up for the group. I think this is going to be the part of the report that takes us the most time to kind of come to an agreement, hopefully, on the 26th. And so we did this last time, but we have some new folks, and maybe people's opinions have changed or whatever. So I'll start out and kind of give where my head's at right now on conclusion recommendations, and then maybe just move to the group and see what other folks have. And so maybe we can identify now any significant disagreements and start kind of talking through those. And so hopefully on the 26th, we've already worked through some of these kind of disagreements and maybe are closer at that point to coming to something everyone can agree on. Does that make sense to everyone? Have any other ideas for the next hour? All right. So for me, I haven't changed my kind of thoughts. My opinion is basically that, we've done some great work. The survey is really helpful. I think it's going to inform our work going forward. But for right now, I do not believe that we have enough information, data, expertise, or time on the subject devoted to make any specific recommendations that rates should be increased or decreased as it stands right now. But I think we need to continue this work next year, and next year we might have some solid recommendations. But effectively, my position is that our recommendation is now, hey, keep the status quo, keep watching to see how things play out with the CPI and these legislative changes and stuff like that. And we'll continue working on this and may have some different recommendations next year. So that's me. I see Mr. Pierce's hand raised, so maybe Mr. Pierce wants to go next and talk through his, kind of position at the moment.
So I don't want to get to conclusions yet, but just I was hoping that we could circle back a little bit to the survey and the quality of the data we get from that. My own sense is that the survey is a good start, but it has enough flaws in it that a whole lot of the data that we've gotten is going to be hard to use, just because of issues with the questions, where we weren't quite clear enough what we were asking for, and so we got a variety of responses that would be due to different kinds of understandings. And in some cases, we've got we have to throw out enough of the responses so that we just can't. We don't have enough responses left over to have clear findings that we can get from the survey. So my sense is that at least with a pitch, we've got a survey that's getting close to providing what we need, but we really need to redo the survey and resend it to have data that we can actually rely on. So that's my sense of what should of the I'm going to say the pitch on number 4, and how we come out of that. So I just wanted to address that because I think the survey is a good attempt on our part, but it's deficient in enough ways that we really can't use a whole lot of that data.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I think you're 100% right. We need to make sure we highlight that. Not to say that it was a good survey. We got some good results, but I think you're right. We should highlight that. Like, look, part of the reason we don't have the data we need to feel like we know everything is because of this, and we're going to improve it in the future. So I like that. Mr. Riley.
So remind me what section we might be putting in, at least pointing out the commission's recent policy shift where we're applying this new CPI provision. Is that something that's going in section 2?
So yeah, so I have in the section 2, I have drafted at the very end of it. I just highlight, because really that primer is where you kind of see the meat of that stuff happening. But I highlight that, of special note, between 2019 and 2021, 2 proceedings were conducted, and the result of those was the implementation of a CPI increase annually. And then if they want to know all the meat and details of that proceeding, then they can go to the primer. But I am making sure to highlight in that section 2, because I think it's so important that I want it to jump out at the readers. So because people aren't going to read that whole primer, but if they just go read those sections, I think that's the most important thing to make sure people understand.
Sure. So if that's the case, if in section 2 is referencing it, I do think that's something we should put in the conclusions and recommendations section, even if just to point out. And again, this is just my personal position. I like that the commission has taken kind of a policy position where it's willing to explore new ideas. Obviously, the application of annual adjustments as opposed to waiting a handful of years and then revisiting from time to time. This is a pretty significant shift from that, just the way they've laid out, and they're only doing it, as far as I know, with towing. I don't know that they've expanded that into other industries that we regulate. And to be fair, there's a lot of other industries that we regulate where we have no say in what they charge. It's all free market in regards to what rates they're assessing for different services. But I do think the task force should weigh in on that aspect and how we all feel about it. My personal position is I like that they're trying something different, because going through all these very lengthy rulemakings once every 5 years or so, it takes a lot of time, takes a lot of resources, both from the industry and from the commission as well, to sort all this out. Whereas starting at a base rate and then just saying, yeah, we're going to just follow trends in the economy, in the market, and just give little tiny bumps from year to year, so that we don't have to come back and give larger bumps every 5 years or 6 years or however frequent it is. So again, I like the idea that the commission's trying something new. It is very new. It's something we've only really been doing for the last, couple years at most. And, even though things are rough right now in that particular vein, referencing inflation percentages and things like that, this isn't the best time to do that, of course. But I still think the concept warrants a try, like a real try from the commission. And that's kind of what we're in the middle of. So I do think the task force should at least reference it somewhere in the conclusions and recommendations, even if just to say, listen, we recognize this is something new the commission is trying. We're willing to take kind of a wait and see approach and see how it works, over the next, couple years to really see how it works. Anyway, I think it's something I like that we're referencing in section 2, just letting the people reading this report know that this is something that the commission is currently trying. But then further, the task force position on that, even if the position is something simple like, yeah, we recognize this is something new the commission's trying, and we're content for now to wait and see before we specifically call this particular provision out one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And I would just even add on to the back of it. And it's something Joanne may be bringing up and may have some input to say. And in addition, the task force in future years and future meetings plans to take a look at if there's a better metric than CPI to apply here. And maybe there is, maybe there isn't. We should look at that. I would add that on there too. Ms. Rusha, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we're coming up at time. Wait, are we going till 3 or 4?
4.
Okay, 4. Okay. But we're halfway through, and I would ask that we also discuss what it is we're voting on, like specifically the motions for the next meeting, so we have time to process that, and maybe we can put it in the agenda. Like, for example, the last meeting, I guess requested / suggested that we vote on each individual charge in the rates, except for like police, non-consensual, because that we didn't discuss that. I think there's some value in that, but anyway, I just wanted to put out there that like before we close the meeting, Trevor, I think it would be helpful if we had at least a rough outline of the specific votes that we're going to be taking as far as recommendations. And I think, and to that end, like if we all agree, let's say we all agree that, we should just stay the course for now, for whatever reason, does that mean stay the course and we would still recommend that the PUC use the CPI to do an automatic rate adjustment next time? Or is that even a separate vote? Or is stay the course like no CPI adjustment because of whatever factors? So anyway, does that make sense, Trevor? Like,
I think so.
Before the end of the meeting, do you think we could kind of have that conversation? And then if we're using Robert's rules, we can vote up or down on whether or not we're going to call a question to something. But it would be helpful for me at least to get a sense of what the actual decisions, or votes will take place in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so I think I get it. So the first I'll answer is kind of the second in the middle of your question is on the CPI. That's already happening. So like we're not recommending that they do a CPI increase. That is already by rule.
Right. No, I understand that, Trevor, but we are making recommendations on rates, right? We can't set them. We can't tell the PUC what to do, but we're making these recommendations, and the CPI automatic adjustment is in my mind, that's part of rates, right? So if we're making a recommendation, then I think we need to be clear if it's like stay the course, including the CPI process that, you've been doing, or for whatever reason, when, like keep rates flat, at least for a year or whatever, because of X factor. Like, does that make sense? Like, I think we need to be specific. Yeah. Because that is, I understand that is already happening, but that's also part of rate. So I think that should be specific when we make a recommendation. And then the other part was, I think that we should make recommendations, up, down, neutral or whatever, increase, decrease, stay the same on the other categories of the rates, fees. Does that make sense?
Okay, got it. So I think
And
I see
even if it all ends up being what you just said, like, and we all agree with you, at least we did our due diligence and the public can see that,
got it. So yeah, I think I see what you're saying, especially on the CPI. That's saying, I guess my position, and people may have different ones, is that when I say the status quo, I mean pretend that we did nothing. And so by doing nothing, that increase that's in there by rule happens in the spring or whatever, the CPI increase. And frankly, as a practical matter, it would, even if the task force said, hey, we recommend that you pause the CPI or increase it or whatever, that wouldn't happen in the spring anyway, because basically we're just recommending to the PUC, and they may or may not decide to do a rulemaking. As Nate can tell you, like these rulemaking can take like years, like literally years. And so my position would be like, we don't recommend any rule changes. And so at this point, with regard to rates. And so that position would imply that like things continue as they are, which would include the CPI increase, whatever that may be, that would normally happen in the spring. Is that kind of, at least my position kind of makes sense how I'm articulating?
Yeah, no, I understand your position. But saying that we should stay the course is still a rate increase because it's in the rules. And so that's why I wanted to make that distinction. And I think that we as a task force should have a position on that because it is something that is by rule and not by statute. And I think in our purview if we're evaluating, right?
Yeah.
And we might all just decide like stay the course. I just think we should call that vote.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense. And that's kind of like when we go around the horn right now, like I'm wanting to kind of figure that out, right? That like, if it turns out that most of us are like, have like maybe you have a position that like, hey, I think that CPI should not happen this year, that it should be paused or something like that, right? Then I want to hear from the group as we go around the horn. If it turns out that several people are like, yeah, that's what I think, and here's the reasons why, then that's something that we're going to have to discuss more. And so I'm trying to figure out which are the areas in which we agree and which are the areas which we disagree. And so I guess I turn the question back over to you. Like, what is your position like right now on that or anything else? Not just, hey, we should address it, but like, what do you actually think should happen and why?
On each of the individual.
Yeah, if so, because I would say to your other point of going through each rate, like I understand why that would be valuable, but I think we'd have a hard time making a logical argument because like how would I go through and say, well, this rate should be increased by 20% and this rate should be decreased by 37%, and this is the number it should be. I with the data we have and information, I wouldn't have any way to articulate that in a logical manner. Like, for example, just, anecdotally, my feelings and being in the industry and stuff like that, I'll tell you that I think that law enforcement rates for non-consensual are too low. I think they should be higher, but like, that's just my feeling. I don't have any, I couldn't make an argument to you based on any kind of logic beyond that feeling right now for that position. And so like on the individual rates, I feel the same way. Like I don't think anyone has like a real good reason to say this rate should go up, this rate should go down. Because if we're going to address individual rates, we have to recommend something. Like we have to say this should go up X percent or this should go down percent. And I don't know that we have the ability to coalesce around those exact numbers on each individual rates right now.
So I would push back on you. We don't have to say rates should go up by or down by a percent or a dollar amount, but we can make, maybe more broad or holistic comments on rates if we wanted to. I mean, the unless I'm wrong and, Mr. Riley can correct me, the directive wasn't, to give dollar or percentage amounts, right? It was to do a review and make recommendations. So, I mean, and like I said this, I think since the beginning, I personally think that the after hours towing fee is inappropriate because if you are towing after hours, you are open. for business. And if you're, generating revenue after hours, then you're, again, like you're open for business. So that would be one that I would like to call out and discuss. And it doesn't mean that the group says, it should be reduced by 100% or 50% or 12 or whatever, and that someone's going to have to like call it for a vote and make a motion. I assume that will be me. But that's just like one example, of I could justify my argument for something based on a principle, even if I don't have not consensual towing rate data or whatever. I have other points of data. Does that make sense, Trevor? Like I think we should, I would really appreciate it, like if you as chair would at least endorse adding like those specific questions to our agenda. And I think most of that will go pretty quickly, actually. There might just be a few points of question.
So, well, first I'd say like I want to do whatever the group wants to do. I want to direct kind of the conversation, keep us on track, but like, so I guess let me characterize my thoughts and then see if I can characterize yours. And then maybe as we continue going around the horn, I just want to hear what everyone else has to say. And some other people might, like there may be several other people that are like, oh, Joanne's 100% right. I think we need, recommendations need to address each individual rate in some way. And if that's the case, then we can do that too. So my position is like, I don't have a good reason to differentiate any of those right now. Like at a later date with more information, I might feel okay about doing that, but I don't at the moment. Like, I don't think that there's certain rates I have enough information to make a recommendation on, and some I don't, right? But as we go through the horn, I want to hear what other people say, but that makes sense. So your position is basically like we should address or provide a recommendation of some kind on each individual rate on the rate chart. Is that right?
Correct. Even if the recommendation is no change.
Gotcha.
But we just treat it all, just individually, there's like 5 of them or something, just boom, boom, boom. And I've been up front, where I am on after hours, and I would, like I said, I assume I would make the motion, and my motion might also just be general comment about it, and not like waive it completely or something. But some general language, like because of this reason and, that reason, then, the PUC should take it into consideration and reevaluate at the next rulemaking or something like that. Like maybe that's the motion I bring. I mean, for everything else, I'm probably with you, Trevor. It might be reasonable to keep things status quo. I don't know about the CPI. I still have to think about it, but we agree more. We agree on a lot. I do think we should do our due diligence though, and just ask the question for every single rate, except for the law enforcement, because that wasn't part of our job description for this report.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think that's valid. So let's go. I'll go to Mr. Riley, and as I go around the horn, if they have an opinion on what Joanne and I just discussed on like individual versus a more broad recommendation, then can chime in when you're talking. That'd be helpful. Mr. Riley.
So it just occurred to me so when we're talking about what Joanne was just discussing about going through all the different individual tow rates, or at least the categories of services, if you want to call it that, and corresponding rates that the PUC, the commission, currently allows towing carriers to charge for those services. As she was discussing it did occur to me that we're going to have to decide how we want to address it more specifically. So, for example, if you look at the rule regarding the base rates for a PPI, non-consensual tow, 10,000 GVWR or less, in the rule, specifically under, 6511B1A, that base price is $203.90. That's the hook fee. But if you actually look on our website right now, that same exact price is $211.11. And the reason for the difference is because while the rule established the base rate effective, I want to say it was March, maybe it was a little bit before that. That the rule instituted the base rate, but then it basically said there are going to be annual CPI adjustments. You can't put them in rule because you don't know what the increases are going to be, but it is reflected in the rule on our website. So basically, if we're going to be going through these rates, we're going to have to decide if we want to look at what the base rate is in the rule, or if we want to look at what the current rate is now that has taken on at least one CPI adjustment per that new standard. So that was something that just occurred to me as Joyanne, as you were discussing, looking at the rates and either, suggesting, oh, they go up a little or they go down a little or they stay the same. In either case, we're going to have to decide what set of rates we're looking at. Are we looking at the base rates that are actually outlined in rule, or are we looking at the ones that have undergone a CPI adjustment? So that's just something I think we're going to have to decide and make sure that that's reflected in the report somewhere in the report, if that's someplace we're putting that discussion.
And keep in mind that each of those rates is applied to different rate categories or different weight categories too. So it's not as simple as like the rate. It's like, well, for which should heavy duty non-consent be the same as should it go up but not under 10,000 but over 10,000? So there would be a lot. There'd be like 30 or 50 different individual rates on the matrix that we'd have to form some kind of opinion on. But we could do that. So Nate, what is your position? Should it be a more broad, hey, like what would be your recommendation if we all got abducted by aliens and you had to make the recommendation on your own today? What would it be?
So I think that where we've gotten to in the rates at this point, it has been based on just so much information, from previous rulemakings dating. I mean, you just look at the primer. I mean, we've gone through rulemaking after rulemaking after rulemaking, of which each individual rulemaking consisted of just tons of comments and pieces of data and public testimony and expert testimony and, all this information, legal analysis, weighing, pros and cons of different, regulatory fee frameworks and all of this. I mean, and even previous reports from this own task force, and it's kind of gotten us to where we are now. It's easy to just look at the current rates and say, oh, they're too high or, oh, they're too low. But at the same time, I feel like the commission has been very diligent, in the past decades of getting to this point. Obviously, there are, I've seen instances, I've personally seen instances where particular rates that the PUC regulates for towing carriers and for other types of carriers, stay stagnant for, I've seen certain rates stay stagnant for as long as 15 years, where it's for a particular type of service. The commission has only allowed certain transportation carriers to charge the same amount for a particular brand of service for well over a decade. And so again, look at other things, point out something that you buy that costs exactly the same today that it did 10, 15 years ago. I would be stressed to find something that does. Anyway, so I think where the rates are now has been, it's been a journey for sure, but I think it's been a fairly organized journey. And again, you can look back through that primer and go into those individual rulemaking proceedings yourself and see just how much time and effort the commission has put into striking that balance between what kind of fees are appropriate to make sure towing carriers can continue to operate and continue to provide those services, with striking that balance against, okay, what is fair for consumers as well. And that's a hard balancing act. It really is, especially in this kind of an industry, where you're dealing with non-consensual tows, and people are paying for a service, but it's not a service they signed up for. And I totally get that. But at the same time, like I said, I think the commission has spent a lot of time and effort getting the rates to where they are now. Again, and credit to the commission, credit to people who have participated in previous rulemakings, credit to the previous iterations of this task force. in getting us to this point. And again, I like the idea that the commission's trying something new where it's not going through this very time and effort intensive process of going through rulemakings every handful of years to decide if we want to adjust some of these rates. They instead are deferring it to something that's a little more consistent in that they're referring to the CPI. And again, maybe that's not the best metric to use, but it's what we're currently using, and we're just kind of in the infancy of that new standard. And so I like the idea of giving it a little bit of time to see how it works. But at the same time, I respect other people on this task force and some of the opinions they have based on the communities and advocacy groups that they represent and are supposed to represent on this task force. So that would be my position. Is I kind of like where they are now, or at least I understand why they are what they are now. At the very least. So that would be my comment.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. And actually, I want to caveat, Joanne. Actually, it's not that necessarily like our disagreement maybe is more that I don't think I can do. I feel comfortable doing that now, but I don't disagree with you that like long term, that a more detailed analysis needs to be done by this task force, possibly on individual rates when we have more time and as we kind of move through this process and see how things play out over the next year. So it's more of a question of the timing of being comfortable doing that as opposed to not agreeing that it should be. I kind of think it should.
Okay. Oh, so Mr. Forbes, is it helpful if I just send in advance an email to you with bullets that say these are the possible motions I'm going to make? And then is that something you can put in the agenda where it's like, it's not necessarily an agenda item, but it's like an additional document. Do you know what I mean? Like how we did in the very beginning. Does that help you? And do you think that would help everybody else? So we don't go rounds on what the purpose of the motion is in a future meeting. And does that help?
Certainly. Yeah. And I would just say send that to Nate by the 21st.
Oh, to Nate. Okay.
Yeah. And he can include that in the agenda that everyone kind of gets. So for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Mr. Connolly, you're up.
Say we don't have to make it. You don't have to like send a paper with motions on it. What, can't you just make a motion right now and we can dissect it right now?
Yeah, we certainly could do that. Yeah, there's no reason, Joanne, actually, that you couldn't make a motion for us to proceed in that manner, and then we could make a vote right now, and that might be the easiest thing to figure out where we go from here, if you want to.
Do we have a quorum? I think so. I can't see the whole screen of who's here.
1, 2, 3, 4. We have 9, so yes, I think that's a quorum. The simple quorum's over 50%, right?
And this was our. It depends how we defined a quorum. And this was our mandatory meeting, not our interim meeting, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's an official meeting, so we can actually vote on things today.
Okay. I got to process. I guess the one thing that I would like for us to decide today then is, I'm going to say what I'm going to make, but then I might have to rephrase it after I say this because I wasn't expecting that, Trevor. So the motion that I would make today is that we decide as a group if we are going to make recommendations on each individual rate category. And Trevor, I'm sensitive to what you said about the class, like the different classes and weights. I think unless I'm wrong, it's all scaled, right? So the math.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's all scaled, right? So really, I think we'd look at that first class and then there would be no reason why we would, I don't think anyway, that we would say, for the lowest weight class, it's this. And then for a different weight class, it's something else. It's just on a scale, right? There's a formula there. But so what I would like to put forth is a motion that this task force vote on each individual rate category with the exception, or rate or fees, I should say, category with the exception of law enforcement tows, because it wasn't part of our directive from the legislature. And we don't have to vote on that today. I just want that to be part of our process when, so I guess next meeting or 2 meetings.
So if you want, I think it'd be great. I mean, if we're going to make that motion, we should do it now, because then we can all agree. And then as we're thinking through this over the next couple of weeks, we know what we're kind of doing. So, I mean, I would never tell you to make a motion. I'm saying if you're going to, I would already. Yeah.
Are we in the time of the meeting are we, I don't know what part of business we're in. Can I make a motion now? Whatever I said is my motion. Can you just repeat it back, Trevor? Whatever I said.
So I guess let me paraphrase, and then you can say it as basically you'd like to make a motion that our recommendation and conclusions in the task force report address and provide recommendations for each individual rate category for non-consensual tows, excluding law enforcement.
Correct.
Okay.
Good
So
job.
make that motion sort of, and then we'll see if we get a second.
Hold on. Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Well, I'll let Joyanne say it since she's making the motion.
Okay.
I actually am. I'm so better at writing. Is it okay if I drop it in the chat, Nate? I think are you taking notes?
Well, I'm just if we're gonna take a vote on something, then I'm
Right.
gonna put it in the poll.
So can I just go ahead and just type it out?
Yeah, sure.
Does that work?
Sure.
Okay, I'm doing that right now then. Okay.
Cool. And while you're doing that,
Trevor, you just got muted.
oh, sorry, Mr. Howes, I'm going to go over to you while Joyanne's writing her motion.
Okay. Thank you, Trevor. So just because I was in part of the original task force, is non-consensual and law enforcement divided, or because I thought non-consensual was defined in the last task force, and that included law enforcement and PPI. So there's no differentiation between those two.
Yeah, that is how it was done. And it actually was based on the commission's definition of what a non-consensual tow is. So in that case, the commission did adopt that recommendation from the task force that law enforcement ordered tows get rolled into the definition of non-consensual tows. And that's how we've been doing it since those recommendations back in 2016. However, with the recent adjustment to the statutory definition of a non-consensual tow, it now specifically identifies a tow that is performed without consent of the vehicle owner that originates from private property. And that's the problem, is that now, based on that new statutory definition, we can't include law enforcement ordered tows into the definition of non-consensual tows, because the vast majority of law enforcement ordered tows do not originate from private property. So it doesn't even fit into the definition anymore. That's the issue.
So if there's a law enforcement tow, on a private property, where does that fall in?
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
Yeah, that would fall under, it doesn't happen very often, but that would fall under a law enforcement tow. I don't know if this is this is just practically how it would work, right? Like if a law enforcement officer orders a tow off of private property, that will be towed by a law enforcement officer, and it will fall under those categories. So like law enforcement tows trump private property, if that kind of makes sense.
Okay.
Well, it's all based on who's authorizing the tow. So in this case, if it's a law enforcement officer that's authorizing the tow from private property, which, yeah, like Trevor said, I hardly ever hear of that happening. It's almost all law enforcement order tows we deal with originate from public property, because on public property, law enforcement is the only one who can authorize a tow from that kind of a property. So
with the data we have now, I mean, so we could differentiate as a task force rates for private property towing and law enforcement towing.
So Jim, actually, it sounds weird, but it's the case, right? That as of right now, our mandate is to provide recommendations on non-consensual towing rates by statute. In that same bill, it basically made law enforcement towing not non-consensual anymore. So
It's still subject to the rates that have been set through, as Nate.
that's an open question, right?
Yeah.
We don't No, but our task force isn't responsible for those, basically. There's a purgatory limbo happening around law enforcement towing right now that the PUC is going to have to sort out, because there's a difference of what it says that non-consensual towing is by rule and now by statute. But our task force is only going by the statute, and that bill made law enforcement towing not non-consensual anymore. And so for us, for this task force, when we talk about non-consensual towing, we're only talking about private property.
Okay.
It's
Is
a mess.
Nate, is that how you understand it also?
Yeah, I guess I don't see it in as much of a state of limbo as Trevor described, just because, again, I was assured as House Bill 2213-14 was making its way through, because I kept pointing out how this could impact law enforcement order tows. And I was assured that this bill in no way was intended to somehow limit the commission's ability to regulate law enforcement order tows. So that's what we're operating under. I don't know that I've seen anything substantial to make me think that law enforcement order tows is something the commission is no longer able to regulate. I haven't seen anything like that. So there's definitely a little bit of confusion just in general regarding the new legislation. However, I believe at present we are continuing to regulate law enforcement ordered tows mostly how we have in the past. There's some caveats to that based on things the new legislation does do, specifically in 4010.1405. But again, we're working through some of those issues, on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. And so on the motion for each rate category to be voted on, so do we have the data, the sufficient data? I mean, I was thinking the tabling for this year was so we could get the data. So do we just look at what data we have and kind of base it on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's all we, as far as data and information, that's kind of all we have at the moment is that, unfortunately.
Okay.
Could I jump in, because I think I have a point that will address Mr. Howes.
Yeah.
And I guess it has to do with Joanne's recommendation. I'm broadly in favor of the general direction of where that motion is heading. My problem is with the nature of what we'd be voting on, and the content of what we were agreeing to or not. So one version of the content is that we are voting for for a recommendation to the PUC to change rates. And we're going to go item line by line regarding which one, right? And at least where I'm sitting here, I would give a thumbs up to change rates in almost every category. But then I can't put any more flesh on those bones. I would say they need to be changed. And then my follow-up would be, I don't know how yet, then that's where we would need lots of further study and would like to do that further study. But my sense is they do need to be changed, but I can't go further than that. And so I would probably vote for changes in rates across the board. But I guess I'm just curious about how helpful that would be for us to do, given that we don't have again, to use the same metaphor, enough flesh on the bones to get more details in place. So I'm trying to wrap my head around the value of doing this, because I do think we should go through each and every one as a task force, but I'm not quite so sure how that's going to work in the current scenario with our recommendations that we come up with next meeting.
Gotcha. Thanks, Mr. Pierce. Yeah, actually, let's, we do have a motion up, so let's do this. Want to get to that, see if we have a second for that motion, and then we'll open up discussion for that motion and then vote on it. Is that everyone good with that? So
Just real quick, just so I understand the motion, Joyanne. So it's that the task force make recommendations on each individual rate and fee category as part of its report. So does that mean just the different categories? So like the hook fee for non-consensual tows, the storage rates for non-consensual tows, or do we want to actually, because the way you have it phrased right now, the motion as you put in the chat, is that we would be going through not only each category, but each individual weight class within each category as well. At least that's the way I read it. So is that what you're shooting for, or maybe just the categories themselves?
Thank you, Nate. And that's actually why I raised my hand. I was going to say, Trevor, let's make sure we have the motion correct. So I guess I saw them as one and the same. And as I mentioned before, since they scale, I mean, I can amend the motion and just say fee category. What do you think is the best way to describe that?
That's how I hear it. Is so if we eliminated the individual rate and just made it that the task force make recommendations on each fee category as part of its report, that to me means we would be going through the drop charge category, the PPI base rate category, the storage fee category, the after hours release category. So it's like 5 or 6 major categories. Now, each category has a whole bunch of sub rates based on various factors like the size of the towed vehicle and things like that. But it almost sounds like what you're trying to accomplish is just going through the categories themselves, as opposed to each individual rate based on weight class within each category.
Correct, because the categories generally can be, I think, decided on its merits. I don't think if we're in the middle of this discussion in a future meeting, someone can always make a motion that we go through, each class, vehicle class. But I was really focused on the categories and I didn't know how to phrase that. But I think you're correct. We can strike individual rate and just put each fee category in. Okay. As part of the motion. Also, there was a question about law enforcement tows. So I did say that verbally, but I didn't put it in the chat. It wasn't part of our homework and wasn't part of the task force work. So I am not suggesting that we get into LEO, law enforcement tows. But if somebody wants to, I guess, I'm focused on the things that we were supposed to be looking at.
If you want, I can adjust the motion to reflect that the task force make recommendations on each fee category associated with non-consensual tows. Because again, it's easy to point out which categories fall in there.
Yes.
That the task force make recommendations on each fee category associated with non-consensual tows as part of its report.
Yes, thank you, Nate.
Okay, so as long as everyone heard that, do we have a second for that motion? And if we do, then I will open it up for some discussion before a vote. So do we have a second? No seconds. We'll make sure no one's on mute.
I'll second that.
Okay, so
I think that was Dre, I think.
Yeah.
all right, so Andrea has a second. Okay, so now let's open that up for some discussion and we'll see if anyone has any thoughts and then we'll take that to a vote. So any discussion on that? Mr. Pierce.
I'm still having trouble with where we would go with this in a report coming up just next time. To give you just an example of where I'm headed, and again, I'm broadly in agreement with looking at these categories and discussing the appropriateness of charging in each one. My biggest focus right now is not on Well, it's both on the after hours fee, because I also view that as a problematic fee. But I'm much more focused on the impound rate, or so-called hook fee, because it is close to 3 times as much as the consensual rate. It strikes me that the fact that it's that much higher in the published non-consensual rates than it is in the market seems to me to indicate that needs to be restructured somehow. And I really don't know how to restructure it. But I would basically vote that that's not an appropriate fee to charge, because it's not well structured at this point. But again, I'm just curious how that actually feeds into a recommendation that's actionable for the PUC, other than the recommendation that I favor, which is that we start looking at restructuring that particular fee, so that it is better pegged to market rate, while at the same time acknowledging the extra costs that come with a non-consensual tow that aren't borne by a consensual tow. So that's where I would go on examining each of these rates. It looks like they deserve lots and lots of further discussion. But that's the gist of the conclusion I would come to, and I don't see that as actionable for the PUC yet. So that's, I guess, where I'm at. I'm still having difficulty with how this feeds into a recommendation to the PUC, in a way that's valuable for the PUC.
Okay. And Mr. Riley.
I guess I'm just wondering if maybe as part of the recommendation section of the report, we can put together some ideas. They wouldn't be recommendations per se. I guess maybe they would be more under the conclusions part of that section, but basically outlining some of these things that certain members are talking about. Stuff we're not really prepared to make recommendations on right now, but things we're thinking about, things we're talking about. And just, if nothing else, just to put them on the commission's radar. So exactly what Michael just described, in saying, listen, in seeing this, comparative analysis between what a hook fee is for a consensual tow versus what a hook fee is for a non-consensual tow, there's a big gap there. There's a big percentage difference. And so maybe the commission might want to start thinking about restructuring how the fees work, so that those are the hook fee, whether it's a consensual versus a non-consensual tow, might be a little more aligned. And again, I don't know what way that might work, and maybe Michael doesn't either, but it's something that the commission can start thinking about. It's just something to if nothing else, to point it out. So that's what I was wondering about, how we might be able to handle certain parts of that recommendation section. In regards to the motion on the table, I don't know. I'm a little more inclined to go with more of a bird's eye view in regards to the rates themselves, just kind of looking at them all together, as opposed to going through them all individually. I mean, if the end game recommendation is going to be that we're not really recommending any changes to any of the rates at this time, going through them each individually, I'm struggling to see what is to be gained from that. One thing I think everybody has to keep in mind, especially when it comes to this report and the approval of the report, is that I think we could probably all agree that whatever ends up being in the report is not going to be something everybody on this task force is 100% okay with. There's going to be some things where we're all going to have to give a little bit in regards to what it says or what the recommendations are. In some cases, it's going to be, the recommendations are going to end up being not quite enough what a particular member wants, or in some cases it might be too much, for a different member. So as long as we're all on the same mindset in regards to that, I think there's gonna, I think by the end of the day, when we're done with this report and it gets the approval that it needs to be filed on time in accordance with the statutory mandate, there's going to be some things that end up in this report that is not going to, sit completely 100% well with every member on this task force. That's just what's going to happen. I'm sure there's going to be things in the report that I'm not too thrilled with, but that's, again, it's the give and take process on what ends up in those recommendations. So those were my only thoughts. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Nate. Ms. Russo. I think you're on mute, Joanne. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So now I'll just repeat what I said in the chat. I don't know if you can see it, Michael, but what you suggested is also, your example is a recommendation, whether we call it a recommendation or part of the conclusion. Even something that says, we recommend to the PUC that they consider PDQ for reasons of XYZ. We can we can still justify thought process, and even if that recommendation fails, I'm assuming the fact that it was made and we voted would still be noted in the report as well, maybe just by number or whatever. I guess that, is TBD. I personally wouldn't be able to vote from just a bird's eye view because I think we should have those discussions, even if they go quick. And we don't just have a rate, we have rates. And I know the legislature wasn't very particular about what we should be looking at besides the, some direction on the comparison with consensual towing. But we do have different rates. It's not one flat rate. And I think it's our duty to make recommendations on rates, not a rate. So that's another reason why I flagged and I'm requesting that we just, go through that short list.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. And I do, it might be semantics, but when I think of recommendations, I think of something we're specifically explicitly telling the commission to do versus something that I think could more fall into the definition of a conclusion where it's these are some other ideas we're thinking about. It's, we're not really prepared to fully, explain them, but it's things that are occurring to members of the task force and things that are on the table. We are discussing them. And even though we don't have enough right now to point to the commission and say, we think you should take this particular idea and apply it, it's more like, this is an idea we're thinking about right now. Semantics, but anyway.
So as one of the attorneys in the room and a person who's good with words and semantics, then because I personally am fine if it ends up under considerations and not a recommendation. Should we amend the amendment and use a different word than recommendation? I mean, do you see what I'm trying to get at? I think these things need to be put to public discussion. And again, there are only a handful of categories and they are rates, plural. Do you think there's a better motion, Nate, or?
I think the motion you have is fine. And again, when I was talking earlier about, given as part of the recommendation section, putting ideas out there for the commission to start thinking about, because again, it might be stuff that's not on the commission's radar. And so again, just putting ideas out there, it's nothing to do with what the current motion on the table is about. It's just, I'm thinking about, kind of more about what this report's going to look like. And some of the things that I know Michael was discussing earlier in his comments, he said he wasn't totally comfortable with, the way the discrepancy between a hook fee, which is the same fee for a consensual versus a non-consensual tow, which I think is one of the reasons the legislature wanted us looking at that. And so I totally can see where he's coming from. And so while that's not a recommendation per se, Michael isn't saying, we should he's not saying we should lower the hook fee for a non-consensual tow rate to the same as a consensual tow rate. That's not what he's saying. That would be a recommendation, but that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, this is an issue. I think this is an issue. This is something we should start thinking about. We should explore further. He doesn't know what the answer is. The commission probably wouldn't know what the answer is either. None of us probably know what the answer is, or at least not an answer that would be backed by anything substantial. It's just how we're looking at it and how we feel about it. So again, I was just pointing out that there could be a difference to how that section 6 of the report looks, in that once we do put our recommendations out there, we can have then a subsection beyond that to basically say, by the way, here are some other things we're thinking about, some of the other things we're talking about. It's nothing we're prepared to give recommendations on at this time. However, it's something that, you know, we just want to put on the commission's radar. That's all I was saying.
Okay, then I mean, I think we're on the same page, and maybe it's just a semantics language issue. So I totally forgot where we are in Robert's Rules of Order, but can I amend my motion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know. Oh wait, I'm sorry. Was that Dre?
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so then I'll write this in, but then I'm gonna amend my motion to say that, like, the task force vote on if we should make a recommendation on each individual fee category and include it in part of its report. Then that way it gives us, I think, more wiggle room in the next meeting to say, you know what, some good points have been made. We can make votes on if we want to put something in a consideration section.
I think as long as we're talking, because your motion, I think what you just described is already captured by the current motion.
Okay, if that's okay, then we'll just leave the current motion, just as long as everyone understands that I am also okay if, you know, like, we have a conversation and maybe we don't have a straight up down or all the information, but we have enough to, you know, I'm saying make a recommendation to consider. It feels like a recommendation, but on considerations, it's fine with me if it's in a different section. I just want it to be noted that it was discussed. So I'll keep the motion. So then I can just I'll keep the motion as is then, and then it's still on the floor.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Thanks, Nate.
Any other discussion or thoughts on this? I'll give mine real quick, and I just want to be clear. Like, I think Joanne's position is very valid, right? That, like, hey, like, each individual fee category, to provide a recommendation on those. My position is basically, I just don't think that it's feasible to do that in a thoughtful way right now. So my vote on the motion would be no, but because of the time constraints and lack of data and information, not because I think that it's not a valid thing that should be approached either by us next year or by the commission. Mr. Pierce.
Well, so as Joanne has redescribed it, I guess I'm now strongly in favor of it, just because the goal is, if we're going to make recommendations, one of the recommendations could be, we need to look at this carefully, and the PUC needs to look at this category of rate carefully. So that's what Trevor, what you were saying was basically, because we can't put flesh into what it is that we're recommending to do other than look at it more carefully, we should vote no on making a recommendation. And if I understand Joanne right, it's that the recommendation be that we look at these more carefully, right? So that would be, I think that's amenable to most of us, just because it's not committing ourselves to any particular rates. It's not committing ourselves to any particular reanalyses of the categories. It's just saying we've got work, and we believe that progress is going to be made by starting to work on these.
So like, I would argue that if that's the case, and I understand what you're saying, but the motion as written right now is not that. So we would need to amend the motion. And so let me characterize what I think it is. And Joanne, because it's your motion, so you chime in and say everything is right. I mean, the motion as written right now would be that we make a recommendation, like, on each rate category. So that's a very real thing. We're making a recommendation of, don't change this rate, do change this rate by this amount, or decrease it by this amount. Like, it's actual recommendation on each rate. But if the idea is that we want to say, hey, our recommendation is that the commission and this task force next year take a more holistic view at the whole structural way that these fees are done in general and evaluate those then that's a separate motion. That's saying that like we're recommending that this is taken a look at. That's very different than saying we're making an actual recommendation on each one of these numbers. Does that make sense? So I think that if that's the case, then the motion needs to be different, because as written, I take that as we're making an actual recommendation on each individual rate category. Do folks agree with that? Or are we confused?
I think we're splitting hairs. Why am I going?
What I saw you nod your head, Nate. What do you? I mean, do you read the motion as written as like it's an actual recommendation on each rate? We'd have to actually put a number on it.
Yeah, I read it as the current motion. I read it as part of our report. Somewhere in that report, right, I assume in the recommendation section, we're actually going to list every single rate category that is attributable to a non-consensual tow. And again, there's like 5 or 6 of them on the list. That would mean we'd go through each category and basically say, okay, so the drop charge rates for non-consensual tows, which is still a thing, even though it's prohibited from residential private properties now under the new statutes. Here are the current rates, and the task force recommendation is to increase them by this amount, decrease them by this amount, or no increase or decrease at this time. Then we go to the next category, same thing. Next category, same thing. And we do it all the way through. And by the end, we've covered all the different current categories associated with each, fee or rate that for non-consensual tows, a towing carrier is eligible to charge. And that would just be included in the report. So if you vote yes, that's what you're voting for, that the report contains something like that. If you're a no vote, you don't think that particular method is necessary. Maybe you think a more bird's eye approach to all the non-consensual rates is easier. Yeah, that's how I understand it.
So let me hang on a sec. Joanne just put something in the thing. I want to read through it real quick.
That's just a language from House Bill 1314.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So I think where we're at right now is it seems like Nate and I believe that the current motion as written says something very specific, and it requires us to provide very specific recommendations that would have numbers attached to them. But it seems like Michael and Joanne do not believe the motion prescribes that. And so I think we're a little bit of an impasse because we don't agree on what the motion means.
Do you have a recommendation to amend the motion?
Yeah, let me think, because I think I know what you're saying. I'm trying to think what language might. Mr. House.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement that we need to look at all these rates and charges, but I just don't know if we have the time and the data to do that before November 2nd. I mean, I was it took 2 years to come up with all this based on economy. It took 10 years with economists and judges' rulings, and to try to come up with this before November, I just, I would be okay with the motion that we're going to look at we're going to gather the data and make the recommendations. And if I understand Nate, I mean, I guess we could recommend PUC to look at those rates and charges. But that's still, isn't that what we're commissioned to do, is to look at those rate and charges?
Well, and it's what the commission does anyway. And so, telling the commission to do something that they already do isn't really going to do anything. I think they're relying on us to give our expertise as well as be a representative voice for all the different communities and advocacy groups that we all have been appointed by the governor to represent, to come up with recommendations about the maximum rates, where they are now, where we think they should go. And so I get why Joyanne wants to go through all these fee categories individually. If even just to say, here's what the rate is now, and we're recommending that no changes occur at this time.
And I'm not disagreeing that we need to go through them. I mean, I think that's part of our job, is to go through each one of these. I mean, there's no disagreement there. I just think this needs to be done as probably as thorough as it done the first time, Nate. I mean, that's my, which I know it's going to take 12 months at least because when the task force originally recommended these rates and fees, we went through the whole cost analysis, and then that got vetted through the economist, and vetted through the judge, the ruling judge, and testimonies. So, I mean, at least, because we have to, the fees are tied into the rates and the charges. I mean, it's all interlinked.
Mr. Connolly, and everyone, I'm going to try to move us quickly. It's 3:58, so I kind of want to, we're going to go over a bit, and that's fine. I just want to accelerate this real quick to make sure we get to this. Mr. Connolly.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, yeah, I agree that we should go through all of those, every little detail on all the rates. We should definitely hit that. We're not going to get that done by November 1, but my suggestion would be we pick a category or a rate, and we work on that throughout the next year and go through each one until we come to conclusion on each one. But as far as being done by November, I think we're pretty much stuck with the information we have.
Okay, so everybody, just in the interest of time, we do have a motion on the table. And so I believe we need to take a vote on it, and we do have a second. So everyone's going to have to vote on this based on their interpretation of what the motion is. And I'll just read it to make sure everyone's clear. And that is, quote, that the task force make recommendations on each individual rate and rate category as part of its report. So that is the motion that's on the floor. So let's take a vote.
Sorry, Trevor, he amended that. So the actual motion, do you want to mute real quick? Feedback.
Oh.
So yeah, she did amend that, and I had written it down exactly how she indicated it. So the motion is that the task force make recommendations on each fee category associated with non-consensual tows as part of its report. That's the motion. That's
Okay,
awesome. And that's the one that was second.
Okay, thank you, Nate. Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Let's take a vote.
All right, give me 1 second to get it up.
And while Nate's doing that, after that vote, again, it's 4:01 right now. I'm going to open it up for public comment time, and then we will conclude.
Okay, poll should be up. All right, we have 6 votes. I think there's still 9 people in here.
Yeah, so everyone, if you look at the bottom right of your screen, there's like some shapes, like a triangle, a square, and a circle. Click on that, and it'll prompt you a yes and no box that you can use to actually vote.
You have to click into polls from that box. But yes.
Right.
So we have 7 votes.
And if you're abstaining, you can say that also.
Yeah, it's still 7 votes. Oh, there's 8. Okay. I'm a yes vote, by the way. So that's our 9. So it's 4 votes yes, 5 votes no.
Okay, the motion does not pass. Although I'll just say, Joanne, like, I like your train of thought, I think is really valid and makes sense. So I don't want you to take that as like, let's not discuss this anymore. I think we should on the 26th, because I think there's some real validity to recommending maybe looking at the structure and all that stuff for sure. All right, everyone, let's open up for public comment time. Do we have anybody? I think Mr. Porras listens in, but I don't know if he has any thoughts. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. Let's make sure that everyone here is participating on the 26th, super important. If you have a section, make sure you send to Nate by the 21st via email. Nate will send out the agenda with those as attachments so everyone can review. And on the 26th, I would be prepared to, well, we're not going to do it in 2 hours. So I would be prepared to maybe spend 4 hours, so clear your calendar. We're not going to go into the next day or anything crazy like that. At some point, I'll shut it down, but plan on it going over substantially. So thanks, everybody, and we will see you next time.